Jesus' call to humility. The role of humility in our lives as followers of Christ, cultivating a servant's heart. Climbing the ladder of humility. There was once a humble gardener and a boastful businessman lived in a town. The gardener always tended to his plants and helped his neighbors. After some years, the whole town was green because he was tending the plants and giving the small plants to the neighbors. He was very eco-friendly, while the businessman flaunted his wealth and achievements. The gardener, outgoing, helpful; the businessman, all self-centered, flaunted his wealth and achievements. How to understand the Gospel passage, Matthew chapter 23, 1-12. The Pharisees' desire for recognition. Same way, the story of the boastful businessman to the Pharisees' love for public recognition. The Pharisees like to be seen as righteous and important. St. Benedict talks about ladder of humility. There are 8 steps. The first step, he speaks about fear of God and mindfulness of Him. It is not empty mindfulness as we see in other religion. It is mindfulness of God in climbing the ladder of humility. Second step, doing God's will, not your own or other people's. Very many times we are pleasers. We want to do our own will. But how do we do God's will? Third, willing to subject ourselves to direction of others. God speaks to us through others, prophets, saints, neighbors, family members. Patience to accept the difficulties of others. Radical honesty to others about our weaknesses and faults, our vulnerability. Deeply aware of being chief of all sinners. We are sinful, but with God's grace, we are moving towards holiness. Step 7, speaking less. It does not mean to be quiet, but in soul searching, the inner silence. Step 8, transformation into the love of God. The humility is a virtue that transforms us into love of God. When you get time, pause this video and look at the several steps. Fear of God, God's will, subject ourselves to the direction of others, patience, radical honesty, aware of being chief of all sinners, speaking less, transformation into the love of God. Jesus' call to humility. Jesus calls us to a life of service and humility. At the Last Supper, we know Jesus washed the feet of the disciples and said, "As I do, you wash one another's feet." The opposite of pride is humility. The role of humility is in our own lives. In a humble perspective, embracing humility means recognizing our dependence on God. We live in a self-centered, egoistic world. The dependence on God changes the perspective. To see ourselves as servants and not as those seek the highest place. It can be challenging. We live in a world of success, achievements, all about me, because achievement and success is related to how much money we make in the competitive world. But you can make money, you can grow higher in the ladder of success. Deep down, if there is no honesty, acceptance, humility, we cannot grow in the love of God, in dependence on Him. Cultivating a servant's heart. It's very important to serve one another with a humble attitude, like the gardener in the story, selfless service to his neighbors. Practical steps we can take in order to embrace humility. Daily reflection. Incorporating daily moments of reflection and prayer. Encouraging self-assessment, commitment to growing in humility. I strongly recommend, if you have an issue with pride, so much of self-centeredness, start journaling. After reading the Word of God, after attending the daily Mass, after the prayer, write down a journal towards commitment in growing in humility. What makes you not to be humble? What makes you boastful and pride and self-centered? Second, acts of service. Challenge yourself to perform acts of kindness without seeking recognition. Do things quietly. There are people who give and talk about, oh, I gave so much to the church. I gave so much to the charity. Let your acts of kindness be personal. Humble relationship. It's important to resolve conflicts and seek reconciliation with humility to mend the broken relationship. The gospel stresses the key point of humility, how the humble gardener helped the people with green plants and grew the town. It calls us for charity, to embrace humility in our daily lives and relationship. May God give us the grace to be people of humility, to cultivate a servant's heart. Matthew 23:11 and 12. The greatest among you must be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, but whoever humbles himself will be exalted.